In the ancient temples of life, the will stood as the altar. It was the axis around which man turned his gaze upward, toward power, toward dominion, toward meaning forged in the furnace of suffering. But the modern man has bartered that altar for a bed. He has traded ascent for release, and in doing so, has desecrated the sacredness of his own vitality. The orgasm, once a crown of union or a thunderclap of creation, has become a cheap drug, consumed endlessly, aimlessly, and with no divine aftermath. The tragedy lies not in pleasure itself, but in what man has allowed it to steal from him his will. The will is not desire. It is what takes desire and bends it into structure, into struggle, into fire that climbs. But when the orgasm becomes the end instead of the beginning, the will atrophies. Repetition replaces ritual. The sacred act becomes mechanical. The modern male, entranced by his screen, lit concubines and algorithmic fantasies, finds in orgasm not a union but an escape from reality, from responsibility, from the terrible burden of becoming. He spills his strength not in battle or in building, but onto tissues and backlit bed sheets. The lion has become the lamb and the lamb masturbates. This weakening is not physical alone. It is metaphysical. It is ontological. Man does not only tire after the act, he becomes less himself. A man emptied too often of his vital force begins to mistake emptiness for peace. His rage recedes. His hunger dies. His eyes, once sharpened by longing, grow dull. He no longer seeks to conquer the world because he has conquered himself into softness. The modern world smiles at this emasculation and calls it liberation. It praises the frequency of release and calls it health. But where then is the man who still burns? Consider the man of old, not the slave, but the creator, the poet warrior, the prophet builder. His energy was hoarded like gold. It was not squandered. He looked upon woman not merely as a vessel of gratification, but as mystery, danger, initiation. He spilled himself rarely, and when he did, it was with weight, consequence, purpose. He saw in orgasm not indulgence but sacrifice. But the modern male, he ejaculates without myth, without madness, without memory. He is his own brothel, his own prostitute, his own beggar. The will, when strong, defers pleasure. It chooses pain when it must. It suffers gladly for a higher aim. But the will, when eroded by habitual orgasm, begins to bow to the slightest discomfort. This man cannot hold silence. He cannot endure loneliness. He cannot build because building takes more than desire. It takes delayed gratification. What once demanded ritual, patience, and proximity to the feminine divine is now satisfied in seconds with the swipe of a finger. What strength can grow in a soil that is flooded daily with indulgence? The weakening is cumulative. Each orgasm unmoored from meaning chips away at the sovereign self. He no longer rules over his instincts. His instincts rule him. His dreams grow smaller. His mornings later. His posture collapses. He no longer looks at the world as something to shape, but something to hide from. And when he does dare to speak, it is often in the language of blame society, women, systems, fate. But it is not society that ejaculates for him. It is not fate that leaves his hands tired and his mind fogged. Orgasm, unchecked, becomes the opiate of the unambitious. It soothes where fire is needed. It consoles where challenge should rise. It becomes the nightly death of potential. The will, once meant to carve mountains into monuments, is now used to click, to scroll, to sigh, to surrender. The man who could have sculpted empires now sculpts his own demise in dopamine bursts. His legacy is flushed, his mission unfelt, his body remembered only by the algorithm that feeds him more. Where the will is strong, man can suffer storms and call them teachers. Where it is weak, he begs for pleasure and calls it love. He no longer possesses Eros possesses him. The seed of his strength, spilled so often and with such indifference, becomes nothing more than waste, biological litter from a soul that no longer aspires. The climax, once a glimpse of heaven earned through devotion, is now a small death repeated nightly, without a resurrection. There was a time when pleasure was a consequence, not a commandment. It arrived unbidden, like a reward from gods who approved of struggle. It crowned the worthy, those who had hunted, built, fought, or loved with depth. But in the modern era, pleasure has been rebranded, industrialized, democratized, and finally, weaponized. It is no longer the byproduct of meaning, but the substitute for it. The orgasm, most potent among pleasures, has become the leash on the neck of modern man. It pacifies him, not by force but by abundance, not by violence but by softness. The man who might have revolted is instead relieved. The man who might have built is instead busy. The man who might have broken chains has already undone his own belt. The brilliance of this pacification lies in its invisibility. Chains are seen, prisons are felt, but pleasure conceals its tyranny. The man who lives for release believes he is free. He defends his indulgence as choice, as liberation, not realizing that he has been engineered into passivity. When man was caged by kings, he dreamed of overthrow. Now, caged by his own comforts, he dreams only of the next stimulation. The screen becomes his shrine, the orgasm, his daily communion. And like all rituals devoid of mystery, it becomes mechanical, predictable, and ultimately stupefying. This pacification is not neutral. It serves power, not truth. The state has no need to beat men who beat themselves. The market has no need to inspire men who are already pacified. The great political trick of the age is not surveillance. It is sedation. A man drowned in his own pleasures does not ask questions. He does not organize. He does not resist. He scrolls. He waits. He consumes. Orgasm is not his rebellion, it is his reward for compliance. The pleasure is the proof he is not dangerous. Pleasure, once the echo of real experiences. Hunger sated, danger survived, love won, has been hollowed out and placed on a loop. The modern man no longer needs to risk anything to feel everything. He can feel without touching, taste without biting, climax without connection. The screen offers 1,000 gods and none of them demand sacrifice. He chooses pleasure not after effort, but instead of it. And so he softens. His senses are sharpened only to the artificial. He grows sensitive to offense, intolerant to silence, allergic to hardship. The man who once endured winters and waged wars now trembles when the fi drops or a woman says no. This artificiality breeds confusion. The man believes he is satisfied, but he is only stimulated. He confuses numbness for peace, comfort for success. He believes he is choosing, but every choice is designed by forces that understand him better than he understands himself. His orgasm is not an act of passion, but of programming. It arrives at the expected time, in the expected place, with the expected result. It calms him just enough to return to work, to buy again, to remain inert. Even his rebellion is simulated, shirts, hashtags, ironic jokes. But beneath it all, he remains docile, domesticated by pleasure. And yet, he suspects, somewhere deep beneath the sedation he knows, there is a howl he no longer lets himself hear. A rage that has not been fed. The orgasm does not kill it, only muffles it. Like a beast behind a door, this primal force bangs its head, begging for blood, for conquest, for danger, for transcendence. But each time it stirs, he opens another tab. He plays another video. He touches himself instead of the world. And the beast sleeps again. The architecture of modern pleasure ensures he never fully awakens. He is too tired to create, but too pleasured to protest. He is numb just enough to obey, to accept mediocrity, to trade his inheritance of greatness for momentary ease. He was born to push boulders up mountains, but he is told to chase orgasms through tunnels. He complies, not because he is weak by nature, but because his strength has been outmaneuvered by pleasure. The rulers of old used fear to control men. The rulers of now use orgasm. It requires no army, no ideology, no law. It requires only that man continues to seek the climax that keeps him from seeking himself. Once, desire was dangerous. To long for another was to place oneself in the domain of rejection, risk, transcendence, and sometimes death. Eroticism was not safe. It was sacred and perilous, like a flame that could warm or consume. To pursue a woman meant to confront her mystery, her chaos, her refusal. It meant exposure. It demanded courage. The erotic was the trembling space between two sovereign bodies willing to surrender without guarantee. But modern man has sterilized this landscape. He has exiled risk from desire, banished uncertainty from pleasure, and made sexuality safe, predictable, and dead. Where once the erotic encounter was earned through effort, character, or even madness, it is now delivered through screens, ordered like food, or simulated in endless digital loops. The man no longer walks into the world armed with the raw tremor of desire. He hides behind avatars, algorithms, and fantasies crafted to flatter him without asking anything in return. The modern erotic has become a transaction devoid of terror, but it is precisely terror that made it profound. Without danger, there is no initiation, only consumption. To desire without risk is to masturbate in perpetuity, even when others are involved. The sacred erotic, the fire that once cracked open the self and demanded transformation, has been replaced with the comfort of knowing the outcome. She will say yes, because she is paid. She will undress, because the script says so. She will moan, because the pixels demand it. He no longer risks shame, failure, or revelation. He no longer needs to grow. The erotic becomes a mirror reflecting only what he wants to see, not what he needs to confront. True eroticism is a dialogue between forces that could destroy or elevate one another. It lives in the space where one is not in control, but the modern man cannot bear not being in control. He wants his pleasure packaged, labeled, and stripped of uncertainty. He watches instead of acts. He scrolls instead of pursues. He plays games where affection is earned through point systems, where sex is unlocked like a reward. He performs the ritual of desire without the presence of danger, and thus without the presence of the divine. Danger is what once made the erotic transformative. The approach to a woman was an ordeal, a collapse of ego, a confrontation with rejection, a brush with transcendence. Every real encounter with desire forced man to confront his limits. It demanded the rise of courage, vulnerability, wit, strength. It required him to earn his role in the dance. Now, the dance is automated, the music is synthetic, the partner is programmable, and man, once initiated through fire and longing, now simply clicks. This desanctification of the erotic hollows man out. He no longer lives in awe of the feminine force. He reduces it, simulates it, and commodifies it. She becomes an image, a category, a genre. He consumes her endlessly, yet never touches her essence. The thrill is lost not because it has faded, but because it has been avoided. The fire is gone because the wood was never gathered. The modern man avoids the very thing that could break him into something greater. Authentic, risky desire. Eroticism without danger makes man lazy, spiritually flaccid. He no longer rises with hunger. He does not ache. He does not howl in the night for something vast and terrifying. He does not write poetry. He does not lose his mind. The muse does not visit the man who scrolls. The gods of longing do not speak to the man who fears being undone. The digital orgy he attends daily gives him climax without initiation, moans without mystery, repetition without revelation. The loss is not just personal, it is civilizational. Societies are born in the tension between longing and danger, between the lover and the beloved, between the masculine force and the feminine abyss. When men no longer risk to touch the eternal feminine, they no longer build cathedrals, write epics, or die for beauty. They sit, they consume, they simulate. And the erotic, that once dreaded, once revered storm that forced man into the realm of the gods, is reduced to a quiet, lonely flicker behind a screen. There is a shape to masculinity that has echoed through the ages. A vertical line, a climbing force, a fire that knows only the direction of ascent. The masculine, in its purest and most untamed form, was never content to remain below. It sought the peak, not for the view, but for the transformation that came with the climb. It was defined by striving, by self-overcoming, by tension turned into triumph. Every test, every wound, every rejection served as a rung in the great ladder toward becoming. But now, in the age of instant gratification and collapsed mythology, that vertical urge has gone slack. The man does not rise, he reclines. He does not ascend mountains, he scrolls valleys of pornography. His heroism is no longer measured by discipline, vision, or risk, but by how often he can come and how quickly he can forget. The conquest of self has been replaced by the conquest of pixels. The masculine essence, once forged in hardship and expressed in creation, now spills daily into sinks, bedsheets, and glowing screens. The ascent has been abandoned. The god has been traded for the gland. The modern man imagines himself powerful because he is free to do nothing. He believes passivity is peace, that comfort is success, that softness is evolution. But the masculine ascent was never comfortable. It required a breaking, a split between who he is and who he must become. It required a hatred for his own mediocrity, a divine disgust that pushed him toward higher forms. The man who climbs does not masturbate to cope with boredom. He does not seek release from his own energy. He lets it build until it becomes unbearable, until it becomes fire, until it compels him to create or perish. Yet today he is taught to pacify the storm within, not to master it, not to channel it, but to drain it. Orgasm, when decoupled from purpose, becomes the drain pipe through which his ambition leaks. He does not fast. He does not train. He does not strive toward anything that might threaten his comfort. And so the very structure of his being begins to rot from disuse. Muscles weaken, eyes dull, spine curls, voice falters. He no longer has a direction because he no longer needs one. Everything is within reach, and thus nothing is worth reaching for. The decline is not only physical, it is mythic. The masculine archetypes that once guided men, the warrior, the king, the prophet, have been flattened into consumers. The warrior now fights only imaginary battles. The king governs no kingdom but his curated online self. The prophet has no vision beyond his next dopamine hit. The models of masculine ascent have been hollowed out and replaced with shadows. Boys become men not through trials, but through apps. There is no rite, no ordeal, no fire that burns away the cowardice to reveal the core. There is only release, repetition, regression. The orgasm, used unwisely, is a false summit. It mimics the sensation of achievement without any substance behind it. It tricks the body into thinking it has accomplished something grand when it has only indulged. And over time, the man becomes addicted not to pleasure, but to the illusion of movement. He begins to mistake stimulation for success. He believes the surge in his nerves reflects growth in his soul. But there is no ascent here. Only the looping spiral of decline, dressed in the costume of satisfaction. The man who once built empires, sailed into storms, and carved his name into stone now sits anonymously, head bowed to a machine, giving himself away one climax at a time. He does not even own the act. It is not his lover, his ritual, or his mystery. It is his sedative. It puts him to sleep when he should be waking. It empties him when he should be filling. It grounds him when he should be taking flight. To rise requires friction, frustration, and the raw honesty of seeing oneself as inadequate. But the man who ejaculates too easily avoids this confrontation. He feels no need to improve because he is already rewarded. His biology congratulates him for failure. The very chemicals that once surged after survival and reproduction now surge after nothing. His brain cannot distinguish between glory and habit. And so, the masculine energy within him curls inward, begins to feed on itself, and finally, forgets how to rise at all. There is a tension at the center of all creation. A wound that aches. A fire that builds. It is this inner pressure, this churning unrest, that has driven man to paint ceilings, to compose symphonies, to sail into death. True transcendence is born not from comfort, but from the refusal to yield to the first wave of pleasure. It is the deferral of release, the tempering of one's instincts into something divine. But the modern man, terrified of discomfort and incapable of delay, no longer seeks transcendence. He seeks only release. Quick, easy, forgettable release. And thus, he is hollowed before he has ever reached his height. There is a lie whispered by the world he inhabits, that relief is salvation, that to be emptied is to be free. But man was not made to be emptied. He was made to be filled to the brim with force, chaos, conflict, and then to mold that burden into beauty. The orgasm, when tethered to meaning, can be an act of sacred surrender, a merging of flesh and soul, a brief encounter with the eternal. But when used as a shortcut, it becomes the enemy of depth. It becomes the path downward. The body quivers, yes, but the soul stays sleeping. Modern man does not understand the difference between climax and culmination. He confuses the jolt of pleasure for the arrival of purpose. But release is not realization. Release is the pressure valve opened too soon. It is the artist quitting halfway through the canvas because the first stroke felt good. It is the thinker abandoning his thought the moment it becomes uncomfortable. The man who lives for release dies in fragments. He lives at the surface of himself, afraid to dive, afraid to drown, afraid of what lies beneath his impulses. Transcendence demands that man become a container for his own intensity. that he bear the unbearable, not for the sake of pain, but for the transformation that follows. The orgasm used as escape is the surrender of this sacred tension. It is the refusal to evolve. In the ancient world, restraint was not repression, it was refinement. The warrior did not spill his seed before battle. The monk did not lose himself in indulgence. The philosopher knew that every untamed desire was a beast that could be turned into a star, if only it was suffered long enough. The man who cannot delay his climax will never write scripture, never build a temple, never ascend the mountain of himself. He will merely repeat. Over and over, like a looped echo of a forgotten voice, he will chase the same high with growing hollowness. The orgasm becomes less of a gift and more of a curse, evidence of how easily he can be conquered by his own biology. He becomes his own oppressor, chaining himself to the rhythm of need and numbness. He no longer seeks to go beyond. He seeks to go back, to the last pleasure, the last escape, the last moment he didn't have to think or try or rise. There is a nobility in the man who carries his desire like a sword instead of a burden, who uses it to carve meaning into the world instead of spending it in darkness. This man suffers, yes, but his suffering is alchemical. It turns lust into insight. It sharpens his art. It deepens his gaze. He does not flee from the pressure inside him, he turns it into structure. He resists the lure of release not because he fears it, but because he honors its power. He waits until the moment serves something greater than itself. In this, he transcends. He becomes more than flesh, more than instinct, more than the animal rhythms that govern the masses. But the modern world does not reward such men. It mocks them. It offers constant gratification, pornography on demand, endless novelty. It tells them that resistance is unhealthy, that all restraint is repression, that there is no beyond, only now. And the man, confused, gives in. He mistakes his surrender for health, his orgasm for enlightenment, his weakness for freedom. He ceases to build altars to the unknown and builds shrines to himself. He loses not only his strength, but his direction. In a world where climax is easily achieved, few men will ever reach true culmination. They will die without ever knowing what their tension could have become had they dared to carry it longer, deeper, higher. They will never write their symphony, never meet their God, never climb their mountain. They will only know the flat plane of gratification, the numb descent of endless release, the slow erosion of what once pulsed like lightning behind their ribs. Modern man stands not at the edge of apocalypse, but at the quiet center of his own decay. He has not been conquered by war or famine or tyranny, but by ease, indulgence, and the lie that his instincts should be obeyed without question. The orgasm, once sacred, has become his leash. The release that might once have followed profound union now arrives through flickering screens and hollow gestures, draining him of the very tension that could have elevated him. In seeking comfort, he has abandoned the climb. In chasing stimulation, he has forsaken transformation. The tragedy is not that he pleasures himself. The tragedy is that he does so without mystery, without myth, without fire. The erotic, once the divine force that forged poets and prophets, now barely stirs him. He does not risk, he does not ache, he does not sacrifice. He simply consumes. And in doing so, he forgets the shape of his own soul. The animal wins, the god sleeps. But this ruin is not inevitable. It is a choice, repeated daily, unconsciously, to transcend again, to remember to rise. He must choose to suffer well, to hold his desire until it becomes light, to trade release for revelation, to reclaim the climb, not because the world demands it, but because the abyss within him will devour him if he does not. He must reforge meaning from restraint, from struggle, from the refusal to be pacified. He must dare again to become dangerous, not in violence, but in depth, until man reawakens the sacred danger of his own longing. He will remain a ghost in his own flesh, a creature that could have been a creator, a god that settled for being merely gratified.